The storm had raged through the Montana plains all night, a ferocious monster of wind and sleet that seemed to claw at the earth itself. By morning, the sun struggled to pierce the gray clouds, casting the world in a pale, frosted light. Luke Carter, a solitary rancher with more miles behind him than companions, saddled his horse and rode out to inspect the damage. The snow crunched under his boots as he led the animal along a narrow ridge, the wind still sharp enough to sting exposed skin. He had seen plenty of bad storms before, but this one felt different, angrier, almost purposeful, as if the sky itself had declared war on the land. From the ridge, Luke could see the damage scattered across the valley. Broken fences, toppled trees, a roof blown off an old barn, but it was something else that made him halt and squint. Off the logging road that wound through the pines, a cabin had collapsed, half buried under snow and splintered timber. His stomach dropped. He knew the family that had owned that cabin. They had been traveling through the area, trying to reach the next town before winter settled in for good. The thought of them trapped inside made his pulse spike. Dropping the reins, Luke raced down the slope, boots slipping on ice and loose snow. "Hello, anybody there?" he called, his voice swallowed by the empty forest. Only the whisper of wind answered, threading through broken beams and shattered boards. Then, faint but unmistakable, came a cry. Not a man's voice, not a dog's, a baby's desperate, piercing cry. Luke's heart lurched. He pushed harder, scrambling over fallen logs and icy mud until he reached the wreckage. The cabin was a ruin. The front wall had collapsed entirely, and the roof slanted perilously, like a dying beast. Luke hesitated only for a heartbeat, then plunged in, throwing aside splintered wood. His gloves ripped against jagged edges, his fingers nicked and bleeding, but he ignored the pain. Another cry, a wail, small and fragile, drove him forward. Somewhere beneath the rubble, someone was alive. Someone needed him. Luke dug with his bare hands, tugging and lifting whatever he could. Wood splintered under his grip, dust and snow filling his nostrils. "Hold on, don't give up," he shouted, each word ragged with desperation. A weak groan came from beneath a fallen beam, and he froze, tracing the sound with his eyes. There she was, a young woman, her face pale and streaked with dirt and blood, one arm wrapped protectively around a baby. The infant's tiny cries pierced his chest, tiny fists trembling against the chaos. "I've got you," Luke said, voice low and urgent. "You're going to be all right." He carefully lifted the baby first, cradling it against his chest while the woman struggled to free herself. Her eyes were wide with fear and shock, lips parted as if to speak, but the words wouldn't come. "Please, my baby," she whispered hoarsely, voice trembling. Luke felt a sharp pang in his chest. He nodded, his own breath coming in ragged gusts. "You're safe now, both of you. I've got you." The roof groaned ominously, a loud crack echoing in the frozen morning air. Luke didn't hesitate. With a grunt of effort, he pulled the woman free, half dragging, half lifting her as the final beam fell where he had just been standing. Snow and debris swirled around them, stinging faces and cutting skin, but they were free. The woman clutched the baby tightly to her chest, rocking back and forth, shivering violently. Luke led them to an open patch of snow a few feet away, chest heaving, hands shaking from the exertion and cold. The baby's cries began to fade as Luke wrapped a spare blanket around both mother and child, pulling them close to shield them from the wind. He examined her roughly, noting the cuts on her arms. The blood smeared across her temple. She was alive, yes, but barely. He murmured soothing words, trying to keep her conscious, though she barely responded, eyes glassy and distant. Luke's horse snorted and stamped nearby, sensing the tension, its breath fogging the cold morning air. Luke glanced toward the valley beyond, realizing just how isolated they were. No one would pass by for hours, maybe days. If he hadn't been riding out that morning, they might not have survived. He swallowed hard, adrenaline mixing with the freezing cold, and felt a weight settle in his chest, a mix of relief, fear, and a dawning sense of responsibility. Luke led Clara and her baby across the snow-covered field, each step a battle against the biting wind that had yet to fully die down. His hands, raw from digging through splintered wood, now clutched tightly at the blankets wrapped around them. The baby whimpered, tiny fists brushing against Luke's chest, and Clara clung to his arm like a lifeline, shivering so violently that her teeth chattered in a harsh rhythm. Luke didn't speak much, there was little need. He understood her fear, and more than that, he understood the fragility of life in a land where help could be hours, even days away. When they reached his ranch house, Luke quickly moved them inside, brushing snow from their clothes and wrapping them in heavy blankets by the fire. The warm glow of the hearth seemed almost unnatural after the harsh, gray world outside. Clara sank into the floor, still holding the baby close, tears streaking her face. Luke knelt beside them, feeling the chill in her bones. "You're safe now. The storm's done," he said softly, though neither of them fully believed it yet. He could see it in her eyes, the fear that the world could still collapse at any moment. Clara whispered her story, voice fragile. "We were heading west, trying to reach my family. The storm, it came out of nowhere. My husband went ahead for supplies. He didn't come back." Her eyes filled again, and the baby cried, echoing the raw, helpless emotion in her voice. Luke didn't interrupt, he just listened, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his broad shoulders. He had saved them from the wreckage, but now the challenge was keeping them alive, giving them hope, and shielding them from a world that could be just as merciless as the storm. He found a tin of powdered milk in the pantry, heating it carefully over the fire. The baby's tiny hands flailed as Luke fed him, drop by drop, ensuring not a single precious ounce was wasted. Clara watched quietly, her breathing slowly evening out as the baby's cries faded into satisfied coos. Luke glanced at her, noting the dark circles under her eyes, the pallor of someone who had survived far too much in too short a time. He offered her some hot tea, but she shook her head, gripping the baby tighter. As the day wore on, Luke moved about the cabin, gathering firewood and securing doors against the wind that still rattled the shutters. He was methodical, almost mechanical, as if by focusing on survival tasks, he could keep the fear at bay. Clara watched him from the corner of the room, noticing the way he moved with quiet strength, each action deliberate, almost ritualistic. He didn't just save them from the storm, he seemed to create an island of stability in a world that had been otherwise chaotic and cruel. By evening, the wind had died down, and a strange calm settled over the plains. The snow glimmered under the light of a waning sun, golden and deceptive, hiding the hazards beneath. Clara had dozed off with the baby resting against her chest, wrapped in one of Luke's thick flannel shirts. Luke sat nearby, watching the flickering flames, thinking about the risks they had faced in the narrow thread by which their lives had hung. For a man accustomed to solitude, the weight of this new responsibility was unfamiliar, yet he didn't shrink from it. Somehow, he found strength in it, as if saving them had awakened something long dormant inside him. Night fell fully, and the darkness pressed against the windows like an invisible wall. Clara stirred, waking to find Luke still beside them, his silhouette outlined by the firelight. "You didn't have to do all this," she murmured, voice soft and edged with awe. Luke simply shrugged, a small, almost imperceptible smile tugging at his lips. "Someone had to. The world doesn't wait for anyone, and neither should you." His tone carried neither judgment nor condescension, just quiet truth. The baby gurgled softly, reaching for Luke's rough fingers as if sensing the safety he now represented. Clara looked at the child, then at Luke, realizing that in this small, fire-lit cabin, amidst the harsh Montana wilderness, something profound had shifted. She was alive, her child was alive, and somehow, against all odds, they had been delivered into the hands of someone who cared enough to fight for them. The first rays of morning spilled across the Montana plains, turning the snow into a glittering expanse of gold and silver. Clara stirred in the warmth of the cabin, the baby nestled against her chest in the flannel shirt Luke had draped around them the night before. She blinked at the sun creeping through the frost-lined windows and realized, with a quiet thrill of relief, that they had survived the storm entirely. Outside, Luke moved methodically, chopping wood for the fire and feeding the horse that had carried them to safety. Each swing of the axe sent a shower of snowflakes into the cold air, and Clara couldn't help but watch him, feeling a strange mixture of awe and gratitude. When Luke returned inside, he carried a bundle of blankets and a pot of coffee. The aroma filled the cabin, comforting in its normalcy. Clara smiled weakly, holding the baby closer as Luke set the coffee beside her. "You didn't have to do all this," she said softly, her voice still hoarse from the night's ordeal. Luke shrugged, his eyes on the fire. "Someone's got to make sure people make it through days like yesterday. Can't leave a life to chance." His words were simple, but they carried weight, a truth forged in the hardships of the plains. The next days passed in a blur of survival and quiet bonding. Clara regained strength slowly, sipping warm broth and helping Luke with simple tasks around the cabin. Luke repaired the spare room, fixed the broken shutters, and even carved a small cradle from pine for the baby. Every evening, they would gather by the hearth, the infant's laughter filling the small space as if to chase away all the lingering fear. Luke, who had once preferred silence to company, found himself speaking more, telling stories of the land, of storms survived, and of long nights under the stars. Clara listened, sometimes offering quiet chuckles, and sometimes just resting her head against the baby's tiny body, letting Luke's words settle like a balm. Despite the warmth inside the cabin, Luke knew the world outside remained harsh and unpredictable. When the wagon train appeared on the horizon weeks later, Clara understood that the time to leave had come. She stood by the gate, the baby bundled in her arms, watching the familiar figure of Luke as he prepared them for the journey. "I'll never forget what you did for us," she said, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Luke tipped his hat, jaw set, lips pressing into a thin line. "I just did what had to be done. Nothing more," but his voice betrayed the smallest hint of emotion, a softness that rarely surfaced. As the wagon train rumbled closer, Clara hesitated. Then she reached into her pocket and handed Luke a folded note. "For you," she said, voice trembling. "Open it when we're gone." Luke nodded silently, tucking it into the pocket of his coat. The wagon pulled away, the dust swirling in the wind, and Clara's figure grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared into the distance, leaving Luke standing alone in the snow. He returned to the cabin, staring at the empty gate and the tracks fading into the horizon. After a long moment, he unfolded the note, revealing delicate handwriting. Inside were 5 words that stopped his heart cold: "You saved us both twice." Beneath the words was a small lock of the baby's hair, carefully tied with a ribbon. Luke held it in his hand, the tiny strand soft against his rough fingers, and felt a warmth bloom in his chest. It was a reminder not only of the lives he had saved but also of the connection he had formed, fleeting yet eternal, with 2 souls who had trusted him with their survival. Luke sat by the fire that evening, staring into the flames as the wind howled outside. For the first time in years, the solitude of the plains didn't feel empty. He thought about the woman and child he had pulled from the ruins, their fragile lives intertwined with his own in a moment of sheer, uncalculable chance. Somewhere deep in him, he realized that saving others had also saved him, pulled him from the quiet, unfeeling rhythm of his days and into a life that, while harsh and demanding, carried meaning. The snow fell softly through the night, blanketing the cabin and the plains beyond, but inside, Luke felt a quiet fire burn. A sense of purpose that no storm could extinguish, no isolation could diminish. He tucked the lock of hair into his coat, a talisman of survival, hope, and human connection. Somewhere beyond the horizon, Clara and her child would live, grow, and thrive. And somewhere here, Luke Carter, a cowboy of few words but immense courage, had learned that even in the unforgiving wilderness, one act of bravery could ripple across lives, changing them forever.